you deal with a saboteur in your client's sprint team. I just want to go into a little detail on the naysayer that you might come across, which is going to help you assist your client in identifying the right people to include in the sprint. And obviously, the better you're able to do that, the more successful and enjoyable the sprint is also going to be for you. So the most unlikely naysayer, but one that I've personally encountered, in fact, in my very first sprint in 2015, and that you'll need to prepare for so you can head it off before it becomes a problem. And that's the client's customer. And when I thought about this afterwards, it actually made a lot of sense, but it took me by complete surprise at the time. See, the customer that your client invites is going to be someone very close to the organization and who your client trusts implicitly. Typically, that's going to mean a big, important customer, someone who spends or has spent a lot of money with them, and that they've developed a really good but often a slightly subordinate relationship with. So what happens is the customer enters the conversation used to being the most important person in the room and used to getting, at some level, pandered to by your client. But with you in charge of the sprint, the power dynamic is different to what they're used to, and so they try and change it back. It's not necessarily deliberate, although, with certain arrogant personalities it can be, but it's not always deliberate. It's just that there was a previous relationship which came with its own set of rules, and human nature just naturally expects to follow those rules, right? So how does that look? Well, the first time I encountered this was actually when we used to run sprints in person. So even though we had arrived early to set up the room and we told the client what time we'd be starting and all of that sort of stuff, in walks the client's customer at 5 minutes before the sprint. And after we've done some introductions, he takes the client by the arm and he leads him off to his office to shoot the breeze for 15 or 20 minutes. It was one of those dismissive power moves that people without any real power are taught to do in sales and leadership courses, right? It's childish stuff, but it does happen, so you should be prepared. But that's not even where it stopped, because this is the person that also didn't believe in branding. So he had basically been handed a successful family business with no local competition. It was a tourism business that he had just been given. And so he was the one that was questioning everything because he'd never had to go through any branding to try and make his business successful. Even to the point where he would put a disapproving look on his face and make strategically placed scoffs under his breath when we'd be presenting new concepts. Just one of those fragile ego types who wanted to be the center of attention, right? So there's a couple of ways that you can deal with this. First, you have to have your client on board with you before the sprint, which is actually simple. You can just tell the exact story that I've just told to your client and then express how much potential damage this can do to their success from the sprint process. Second, make sure you assume a leadership position as soon as the customer arrives, right? And that's actually easier to do now that we do this online because they can't log in before you do. So when they log in, you just introduce yourself as the leader of the sprint, thank them for their attendance, express how important their perspective will be to the process, and then just explain the rules of the sprint. So the rules are pretty simple, by the way. They're nothing draconian or anything like that. Just keeping on time, permission to control the room, every idea should be heard, no idea is a bad one, right? All of those normal sprint type rules. We go through those at the start of every sprint. So that's how you deal with that before it becomes a problem if the client's customer is the naysayer. Again, that's going to be pretty rare. Most of the time the client's customer is pretty excited to help because they've usually got more than just a vested interest, right? They're usually pretty good friends if they're important enough to your client to be invited to the sprint in the first place. So the more regular naysayer is going to be internal to the company. And this is an individual who is typically has the ear of the other staff and who is also typically a pretty negative or contradictory personality. Usually that's going to be based in a fear of change or some sort of belief that any change means more work for them, okay? But whatever the motivation, they can slow things down, which is obviously the enemy of progress in a sprint. So here's a couple of ways that you can keep them on topic. First, whenever they bring up any sort of objection, ask them to explain exactly what they mean with their question. And usually it's going to be a very specific problem that relates only to them and it's usually operational rather than brand related. So in those cases, just tell them that that's something that should be discussed outside of this process as it relates to company operations and not the development reasons for the sprint, right? In other cases, they'll object with reasons like, oh, we've tried that, or that'll never work, or any of those sort of dismissive type of stop commentaries. My first response to the we've tried that style of commentary is to ask what they did and why they think it failed. Now, normally they're not going to have an answer to that. They're too low on the totem pole to have been privy to what the company has actually tried in the past. So just explain that if things didn't work before, it's usually due to one of either the definition or the execution not being done properly, or potentially not being linked to a strategic outcome. So let them know that the boss believes that this will be beneficial to the company, and that the largest and most successful companies in the world got that way in large part due to this type of strategic work. Something that goes beyond the products and prices, right? Something that their audience could align with at a deeper level. And then finally, ask them if they can trust the process and approach it with an open mind. Make sure they respond to that question. They can't say no because the boss is sitting there looking right at them, right? And then finally, sometimes the naysayer just wants to validate their inclusion in the group, right? So they might be feeling a little insecure. The way to handle that is to assign them a task. So especially in any voting sessions, there's a need to note down the vote totals before moving on to discussion because they take up a position on the screen that we need to move off the screen to continue with our exercises. So normally that's something that the facilitator would handle, but if you've got a naysayer who's being disruptive, just ask them to do it. Just say, John, would you mind noting the totals here and the votes and the items while it's on the screen? And then we can just move on to discussion without needing to keep this up on the screen. So they're going to feel a little bit more validated because now they're part of the process and you've shot that problem completely out, right? So that's just a few techniques for handling the naysayer because I really don't want you to be afraid of inviting them. Honestly, the positive that comes out of having them there is so much greater than the exertion of managing them because when you pivot them across from being naysayer into brand champion, they're going to bring so many more people with them, okay? So that's it for this video. I just wanted to give you some structure around who to invite to your client sprint team and also break down the naysayer in some more detail so they're a little less mysterious. And if you want a deep dive on how to sell strategy to your creative prospects, so if you've got prospects who are coming to you for deliverables and you want to move into that strategic development role, I've created a free masterclass on how to explain strategy to potential clients, how to pivot them away from deliverables, how to make sure they can afford you, and how to close them into a strategy sale instead, simply by being more valuable. So if that interests you, click the button here or one of the links and you can go and grab it while it's available. It's free and it's available right now. I'm also including all of the scripts with the responses to the entire conversation, responses to sticking points and how to go about roadblocks, and all of that is in there. So go ahead and you can learn how to pivot deliverable clients to strategy clients as long as that class is up. Again, it is free and it's available right now. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the class.